From a surprise typhoon in China that caused 62 dams to fail in a single 24-hour period, to a seemingly never-ending flood 15 times more devastating than the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Here are 5 of the largest flash floods in all of recorded history. Now, there's a reason that people built most major cities near a body of water. Access to waterways makes it easy to export and import goods, not to mention all the fish you'll catch to feed a growing civilization. In 1800, when Joseph Johns, a Swiss immigrant in Pennsylvania, found a cozy plot of land off the Conemaugh River, he planted his flag and called it Johnstown. Creative, huh? Johnstown grew to attract several Welsh and German immigrants, ballooning to a population of 30,000 people. However, in 1889, that population took a significant hit when heavy rain broke the dam, sending 14.5 million cubic meters of water barreling towards the city. Floodwaters claimed over 2,200 lives and caused $17 million in property damage, which equals just over $500 million in today's money. So, what happened? Between 1838 and 1853, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania wanted to build a cross-state canal system, thus giving birth to the South Fork Dam. The idea was to create waterways and roadways connecting Philly to Pittsburgh, but railroads quickly made them obsolete. So, Pennsylvania abandoned the project and sold the land, dam included, to Pennsylvania Railroad. Yes, like the Monopoly spot. The railroad turned around and sold the land to private interest groups who, like all private interest groups, let greed get in the way of safety. They wanted to convert the reservoir into a private resort lake for their rich friends. Now, what do you get when you combine greed and natural disaster? That's right, catastrophe. During a period of heavy rain, the dam failed. Almost 4,000 gallons of water raced towards Johnstown, destroying everything along the way. Coincidentally, the Johnstown flood was the first major disaster relief effort for the American Red Cross since its founding 8 years prior. When you think of the deadliest American hurricanes, Katrina is probably the first one that comes to mind. While Katrina claimed 1,200 lives, it's actually the 6th deadliest hurricane to make landfall in the U.S. The deadliest storm came long before we even started naming hurricanes, and it touched down an hour south of Houston in Galveston, Texas. It was August 27, 1900, when a ship in the Caribbean spotted a storm headed their way. It hit the Dominican Republic as a weak tropical storm, but then changed course towards Texas a few days later. It turned into a Category 4 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, with winds whipping at 145 miles per hour. On September 8th of 1900, it laid waste to the vulnerable town of Galveston, Texas. Also known as the Great Galveston Hurricane, the storm claimed between 8,000 and 12,000 lives. Experts attribute most of the deaths to the 8 to 12-foot flood that ravaged the coastal city. The flooding destroyed about 7,000 buildings, including 3,600 homes. Galveston only had 40,000 people living in the city. After the storm, 25% of them were left homeless. Before the storm touched down, Galveston, Texas was thriving with some of the highest per capita income rates in the U.S. Unfortunately, that booming economy leaned heavily on the slave trade in 1860, becoming the largest market west of New Orleans. Of course, the Civil War put that to an end. In fact, Juneteenth owes its roots to the announcement of the Emancipation Proclamation in Galveston in 1865. When Union troops rode in on June 19th and announced the war was over. Once the hurricane and ensuing flood laid waste to the city, wealthy investors took their money to Houston, thus ending what was known as the Golden Age of Galveston. Today, the city thrives once more as a coastal resort tourist destination. The 1930s was a tough decade in China, especially for flooding. In 1931, the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers experienced crazy rainfall and subsequent flooding. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the 1931 flood covered 30,000 square miles, stretching from Najian to Wuhan. Ironically, the area was just coming off of a 3-year drought and could have used the water. Unfortunately, they got way more than they needed. The flooding caused millions of indirect deaths as many people starved. Once the flooding stopped, workers scrambled to build relief measures in case it ever happened again. Then, in 1935, it did, and their relief measures didn't stand a chance. The Yangtze River, which flows from the Philippine Sea and almost stretches across mainland China, dumped 50,000 cubic meters of water per second. And that is only the second largest flood in the past 400 years. The flood claimed 145,000 lives and left millions more displaced, hungry, and afraid. The Yangtze is the third longest river in the world, behind the Amazon and the Nile. It's also no stranger to frequent flooding. In fact, there have been 5 major floods since 1870. In 2010, the Chinese government built the Three Gorges Dam to try and ease the flooding. However, it's never had to stand up to any real tests since its completion, though it did withstand an extraordinarily rainy season the year they built it. In 1975, Typhoon Nina tore across mainland China, leaving a destructive path of heavy rainfall, failed dams, and massive flooding. The most catastrophic failure occurred when the Banqiao Dam, along with an astounding 61 other dams, collapsed across Hunan, China. The failed dams led to the third deadliest flood in human history, affecting over 10 million people and 30 cities within 3 million acres. The estimated death toll climbed as high as 240,000 people. On August 8th of 1975, the night before everything went crazy, lines of people piled sandbags at the top of the dam, trying desperately to contain the flow. Unfortunately, they were running a race they couldn't win, and the millions of people sleeping downstream were in for a rude awakening. Would you be surprised to learn that corrupt Chinese officials and the Soviets were partially to blame? At the time, China was embroiled in the Great Leap Forward, a period headed by Mao Zedong, who was looking to convert China from an agrarian economy to a communist society. The plan included building 100 dams with the help of Soviet experts all along the river. They built these dams to retain as much water as possible, and one Chinese whistleblower said that was a bad idea. Of course, they didn't listen and went ahead with the plan. At the same time, Mao also ramped up steel production, which eliminated most of the natural land coverage in the region. After the flood, a reporter sought expert advice from those living in the city, but they were too frightened of Mao to speak on the record. Off the record, they blamed land degradation and severe ecosystem damage caused by Mao's Great Leap Forward. Now, as we said, the 1930s wasn't a great decade in China. Let's dive a little deeper into the 1931 flood that, according to some, claimed the lives of 4 million people. In 1930, the mountains surrounding the Yangtze River got more snow than they were accustomed to. Then, as winter turned to spring, melting ice and snow flowed into the middle of the Yangtze River, which was already strained by heavy rainfall. Normally, these high water levels came and went. The natural barriers did their jobs, and the surrounding area only experienced a few minor floods here and there. Nothing too crazy. However, this year, the water never stopped. By the summer, floodwaters forced many living in the low areas to flee to higher ground. Summer turned to fall, and the water kept coming. By August, water levels were 53 feet above average, and floods covered a land area the size of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut put together. It's not easy to get accurate figures out of China, especially figures from a flood in the 1930s. The government said the flood affected 25 million people, but other historians suggest that number could be twice as big. It's believed that 150,000 people drowned in the water, and hundreds of thousands more died of subsequent starvation. Contemporary media estimates the death toll around 422,000, but Western sources say it could be as high as 4 million people when you factor in famine and disease. Unfortunately, the rest of the world had its own problems to deal with at that time. The West was knee-deep in the Great Depression, Japan invaded northern China, and civil war broke out between the communist and nationalist parties. As one historian wrote, the 1931 flood killed 15 times the number of people lost in the Indonesian tsunamis of December 2004, and yet scarcely a word has been written of it. Well, that's all we have for you today. To see another video just like this one, be sure to click the link on screen now. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.